and welcome to this first formal meeting of the Scrutiny Committee. As it's a new electoral term, I think it might be good to go around the room so everybody knows who everybody is and what areas they represent. So I'll start with myself. My name is Paul Honeywood. I'm elected member for Pier Ward, which is basically Clacton Town Centre, and I've been appointed chairman for this committee. So if I move to my right.
It's Councillor Mark Cossins. I represent Hanningford and Kirkby Soken as Vice Chair.
Hello, I'm Sarah Newton, Councillor Sarah Newton, and I represent Coppins Ward, and it's my first time as councillor.
Councillor Chris Griffiths, St James Ward.
Graham Steady, Brightlingsea Ward.
Councillor Adrian Smith, St Bartholomew's Ward.
Matthew Benslem for Lawford, Manningtree and Mistley.
Hello, Councillor Geeta Sudra for Cairn Hall Ward.
And Keith Simmons, I'm an officer of the council, and for these purposes I'm supporting the committee.
Apologies for absence and substitutions.
Thank you, Chairman. We've got apologies from Councillor Thompson, and we've already seen that Councillor Geeta Sudra is here and she's substituting for him.
Okay, minutes of the last meeting, please. I think from memory, Councillor Griffiths is the only member of the previous committee. So I wonder if you'd be happy
Yes, I'm happy to propose it.
Okay, and I think maybe the rest of us are to trust in your judgment on that and approve the minutes of the meeting. Item 3 is declarations of interest. If you have any, you can declare now, or if any issue comes up and you think you need to declare, please do speak up during the meeting. Item 4 is questions on notice pursuant to Council Procedure Rule 38. At this point, I'm going to ask our officer to explain a little bit on this for new members.
Chairman, obviously this item is on the agenda, and for tonight's meeting there was no notice of question pursuant to Procedure Rule 38, but as you say, it's just worth noting at this point that this is a standing item on the agenda. So if councillors do wish to ask a question and have an answer delivered at the meeting through the offices of the chairman, then this is the procedure through which you can achieve that. So this is, as I say, a standing item on the agenda, and here's the opportunity for you to ask a question and have it responded to through the offices of the chairman.
Thank you. We now move to item 5, which is work programming, including monitoring of previous recommendations and scrutiny of forthcoming decisions. Now, as you'll see, this is in a number of parts. So I'm going to ask Keith to go through each part in turn and explain and invite you to comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I think the reason for bringing them together into one report is to effectively recognise that they all contribute towards the work programming of the committee, and it's probably easier to work through the various appendices, and in that respect, if you're happy, I'll move straight to Appendix A, which is the current year's work programme. So the process is that this committee has a work programme of inquiries, so that the process of the individual inquiries can be accommodated by the committee and by officers in support of it and by others if they're contributing towards them. These are determined initially by full council, and later on we'll have a look at a potential work programme for the committee for 23-24. But this really just sets out for you that these were the inquiries that were approved by full council or otherwise by the committee, and the status of them. So as you can see, the vast majority were completed, and 2 customer service and waste, insofar as the scope of them, what identifies what was expected on them, they too have not been completed to date. But obviously there is a volume of work that could be brought together in support of those. I think the easiest thing is to recognise that they haven't been completed and use that fact to support the committee as to whether you want to roll them forward or start afresh looking at a new work programme for the committee for 23-24. Obviously, circumstances of the committee following the election are quite different to those prior to the election. That's Appendix A. Obviously, I'll stop if councillors have got any questions on Appendix A. Otherwise, I'll move to Appendix B, and really just starting on page 25, it's just to use the opportunity of advising the committee that it is an element of the committee's work is to receive back from Cabinet normally the outcome or the response of Cabinet to the recommendations of the committee. And as you can see, the outcome was submitted to Cabinet, and as referenced in respect of both of the items there will be this update, and the update is that the recommendations that are reflected in the response from Cabinet were actually adopted by Cabinet. And so you've had that information in front of you as to how the Cabinet is dealing with the various recommendations from this committee in respect of planning and planning enforcement. So it's really just letting you know that that is the recommendation, and that this committee previously submitted to Cabinet, and it sets out for you the response that Cabinet had in respect of those. And from page 35, is the same in relation to procurement and contract management and the inquiry undertaken by the committee in the last municipal year. Again, I'll stop if there are any questions on Appendix B. Yeah, Councillor Cousins.
Yeah, can I just ask a question? Now we've had these recommendations go to Cabinet, who then becomes responsible for making sure that the recommendations are carried out? Because I do notice from reading that there's going to be an annual training session for new councillors that's going to be held within 2 months of the election on the 4th of May, suggesting that probably by the 4th of July we should have councillor training coming in for enforcement or, enforcement powers, etc. And I was wondering, how we go forward with these, having made recommendations to Cabinet and it be agreed. How do we follow this up? That, for instance, that one that should be in by 4th of July potentially happens.
Ostensibly, that most of these recommendations actually fall to the Director for Planning to pursue and to follow up, and I know that he's aware of that. So yes, they may miss the deadline that you're referencing, but I think there is a strong commitment to ensure that that training is provided on the planning enforcement approach. But to a degree, I would take it that they wanted to ensure that it got through Cabinet, and obviously the first time they could do that was last Friday, and therefore that has cut into the period that you're referencing, the two months, because this committee is only a recommending committee, and obviously Cabinet is the ultimate determinant. So they wanted to make sure that Cabinet was accepting of the recommendations from this committee.
I totally agree with that, but then following on that, number 10 actually makes it a mandatory requirement that the planning committee have that training. So we could put ourselves in a position where that may become a problem.
Yes, Chairman, just on that, the approach of mandatory training isn't actually one for the cabinet. So that would either be a matter for the monitoring officer under the monitoring officer's delegated powers, or a matter for full council. So the extent to which that is incorporated in mandatory training will be being picked up. But obviously there was an intention to do it as speedily as possible following the elections. And I think that's the message that officers and others.
Could I ask, as I say, at our informal meeting, one of the things we discussed extensively was planning enforcement. I wonder, would it be possible when we come to the end of our scrutiny of that, we could receive an update on where the officer is with the mandatory training? Would that suit Councillor Cousins?
Yes, no, I mean, I would be pleased that that would happen. And it may not be the place to make these comments now, but I mean, 2 days ago, I needed to contact planning enforcement, and I have to say the service I got out of them was absolutely excellent. So I think there has been an improvement, and I quite happily have that recorded, that I was very impressed at the performance. But I think if we've produced this work, I'd like to see it carry on. And I think, there is a lot more enforcement that we need to take as a council, because I think it's very important that I've certainly had residents who don't think enforcement works properly. And I think we need to get that message out there. So I think we do need to keep working away at it. So yes, I would appreciate that.
I wonder if we could pass that on.
Yes, Chair. If we're looking for an update, bearing in mind it has only just gone to Cabinet and been adopted, I wonder whether the end of September would be a useful time to get an update on progress with all of those recommendations, so that as an off-agenda briefing for members of the committee, if that's what you're minded to do.
I'm happy to that. How does everybody else feel?
The quarterly report. Would it be possible that after they've given us the update in September to have a 6-monthly review of the service to see how well they're doing against the recommendations that we put forward and that have been adopted by Cabinet? Because it does seem to me that we have a whole raft of recommendations, and at the moment it looks to be going well. But as we've had a few issues with it in the past, maybe if we did a couple of 6-monthly reviews, and it would give us an idea of the direction of travel. And then after a year, if everything's all right, we probably could leave it to the planning committee to carry on, so to speak.
Chair, you can put forward that if you would like. I mean, I'm also conscious that you are later on in the agenda going to be contemplating whether to set up a potential task and finish group to look at enforcement, including planning enforcement, and whether actually that further review would be better undertaken by that group, as they are looking perhaps forensically at certain elements of the planning enforcement activity, and therefore they will be looking and aware of what's going on in the planning enforcement service area.
Councillor Steady, you indicated.
Do we use drones to particular? Is it a council policy to use drones?
There is a drones policy, and we can certainly circulate that to members of the committee. And I think from memory, but it is only memory, there is at least one of the recommendations in here that deals with the drones policy.
Do we have any other comments at this point?
Chairman, it would be useful to just get the assent of the committee to an off-agenda briefing by the end of September, and then potentially incorporating that further look at the implementation of the recommendations through, to say, a potential task and finish group that you're looking at for your work programme for 2023-24.
Okay, are we happy to agree to that? Also, I noticed one of the recommendations was for the planning committee to receive regular updates, and I believe they're due one at the next meeting.
They do.
Could I ask that be circulated to our committee members as well, please? Thank you.
Spending a little bit of time on this. This is a standard element of the report and outlines for you those items put in the forward plan, or the intention to make decisions is publicised. Those decisions pertinent to this committee are extracted and reported to you in the format that you have in front of you. So each meeting you will get a similar list to this, obviously just detailing the various reports. You'll see a number of those ones on your list have now gone to Cabinet and have been determined, and a number of the others are due to be submitted to Cabinet next month, and so will be put into the public domain then on the basis that they are made on the 21st of July. So they're there. I think other than the financial outturn, which I think I would just urge members of the committee when it is published to have a look at and consider what it tells you about the resources of the council, and whether there's something in there that you want to see scrutinised going forward. I think everything else is either a proposal for your work programme or something that has, as I say, already been determined and therefore subject to calling.
Any questions? We're now on to D, which is, I think, the main part of our meeting today.
I would hope so, Chairman. No, it's the vital part. I was going to say the important bit, but obviously everything that we've been dealing with is important. But it is the vital bit. You do need to approve, for the purposes of full council in July, a proposed work programme, because full council needs to determine that that will be your work programme, albeit that once it is approved, you are then able to adjust it on the basis of a very good reason why you would want to adjust it. So it's not as if it so binds you that you cannot vary it at any juncture. But looking at this, and for anybody that members of the public that are considering it, how this has been developed is that you have had an informal meeting of the members of the committee, and the suggestions that were being made at that meeting have been set out in a potential scope for the inquiry. And in addition to that, there was a meeting of the chairman of this committee, the chairman of Community Leadership Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and three further suggestions were made, and they are set out at the end of this appendix that you've had circulated this evening. And for simplicity, I'll just read those. What was coming out of that meeting was of the leader, deputy leader, and the two chairmen of the Overview and Scrutiny Committees, was potentially looking at the North Essex Parking Partnership, and that suggestion is also going to Community Leadership Overview and Scrutiny Committee And there is a suggestion that either that may be the appropriate committee, or you might want to set up a joint task and finish group to have a look at that. Another one was a review of the open space management and maintenance arrangements, policies and budget. And the last was in relation to having an off-agenda briefing paper on where you are in relation to the current waste collection recycling arrangements. And so in preparation for the fact that the current contract expires in 2026 and that it is a major contract of the council and is therefore likely to be something in due course that this committee may well want to scrutinise. So going backwards on that, the suggestions coming from members of this committee was around enforcement, looking at planning enforcement, and we've touched on that already. Moving on to those areas, cross-cutting across the council. What element are those cross-cutting powers utilised by the individual service areas where they've got difficulties that require enforcement, and they may have themselves a difficulty in pursuing enforcement. The extent to which ward councillors are involved in those matters, and also looking at the problem of fly tipping and the potential use of CCTV and the extent to which CCTV has been used to address problem with, I would suggest, environmental crime. So that was a whole area. It's quite a big area. And I would imagine that if you do set this up as a inquiry you want to see going forward, that it should start its work pretty soon. So if you do put this forward, it may be appropriate to start thinking about a task and finish group, or to approve a delegation that would assist us construct a task and finish group, should full council then adopt it. And I would suggest that what elements are started first and which are prioritised or reprioritised out of that quite extensive list is something that the task and finish group is going to be best able to adjust to. I don't know whether to stop there and just see whether there's general support for that item.
I'm happy to do that. One of the things we did speak about in our informal meeting was obviously we are looking at what I would call a completely new administration. And obviously because of that, the council will be going in a different direction, which is the whole point of democracy. And to aid us with that, one of the things we looked at was asking to invite a cabinet member along at the beginning of each meeting, just to give us a brief overview, not a scrutiny of their role or their intentions, but a brief overview of the direction they see the council going within their portfolio over the next 4 years. Only a 10-minute sort of just a brief at the beginning, and I think one of the things we thought was the leader would be a good point to start, and from that point I'm personally quite relaxed about who goes second, third, fourth, etc. I don't know what other people think on that. One thing to bear in mind, I did go to the cabinet meeting on behalf of the Conservative group the other day, and this was on the previous work done by this council committee came up before cabinet. And I noticed Councillor Baker, who's responsible, said that they're already seeing improvements to the work of our planning enforcement team. So I asked if he'd be kind enough to come along and tell us about the improvements that he's seen. And he said he would be happy to do that. So I think that's something. So it may be worth Councillor Baker being high on the list, save his journey twice, or he may be happy to come twice. I don't know what other people think.
Chairman, so we'll record a decision that at your formal meetings you will formally request a member of cabinet to come along and give that presentation.
Excellent, thank you. How would you like to go through the items? Would you like that we have on here? Would you like to go through? Or, my concern is there's a lot here, and I don't see a light at the end of the tunnel in the time we've got available.
I've tried to put in the time frames. So if we start that first one, I think that the council enforcement arrangements, it's probably going to be quite a lengthy in terms of time and numbers of meetings. Task and finish group looking at enforcement. We do, but maybe it isn't for today, but we recognise that we've got to do some work around the budget scrutiny. So that's on here. It's just flagging up that it might be different than in previous years. That's all that item is really saying is it is a function of this committee to be monitoring, looking at, considering, passing recommendations back to cabinet in respect of budget preparations. And I think perhaps before your next meeting, we might arrange another informal session to think about how you collectively want to see that taken forward. But that's all that is flagging up is budget scrutiny is important, but you might want to do it slightly differently. The post delivery scrutiny of the sunspot, which was suggested, my thought on that was to actually just have that actually as an item on the committee's agenda for the 12th of September. It feels to me as that's a quite discrete area of work and could be done as an item on the agenda of a main committee without the need to form a task and finish group. If I run through them, Chris, it's probably easier. The other one that I think could work as scrutiny on by the committee as a whole is the one on carbon neutral. It may well spark further work, but I think if you look at that as a committee at your 12th of December meeting, again, there's a piece of work that you can look at and then determine whether you want to take that any further. Picking up on the point that you were saying, Chairman, is the capacity of members to do that, but the committee will have its opportunity to say, why the 12th of December? It's because I should imagine that the next action plan and the review of the current action plan should be around then available to you to look at and therefore assess the extent to which the current action plan has been delivered against and what the proposals should be for the next action plan. And otherwise, I think it was setting up a task and finish group on the 12th of September. That comes back down to, on self-funding items, that comes back down to this. If we can set something up informally for you to look at how you want to do budget scrutiny, you can think about who wants to potentially sit on a task and finish group just looking at self-funding matters. Looking at the North Essex Partnership, I think personally it fits more closely with community leadership. So I would suggest that you leave that to community leadership. There's nothing wrong in community leadership being advised of the financial implications of the agreement and considering that, none whatsoever. So that shouldn't be an impediment to them advising on that. And then open spaces is something I think is just to be allocated so that you can determine how best and when you want to look at that. And then the last one, as I say, is an off-agenda briefing. If you do it in that way, I suggest you're probably going to have the capacity to do that if you want to do them at committee meetings, you're going to have a very full programme of inquiries. And I would suggest to you that circumstances, even probably over the last week, councillors will be getting bombarded by things, but the members of the public want you to sort of look at. And that's going to happen week in, week out. And in a way, you want to leave some capacity in your programme, in your work programme, to pick those up as they arise. And so having too complete a work programme will frustrate your ability to do that. Sorry, Chairman, I know I spoke for quite a long time.
That's absolutely fine. I have two people wishing to speak. That's Councillor Griffiths, Councillor Steady, and now Councillor Cousins. So,
thank you, Mr. Chairman. In regard to the sunspot, I mean, you could have one meeting where we look at why the costs have gone from 1.8 million to 4.6 million with another £411,000 added onto it. But in real terms, there's a little bit more to it than that, because if you look at it, this is supposed to be one of the main regeneration projects of that particular area, which is incorporating things like CAFs and other local businesses. Now, my view is, as the actual establishment isn't yet built, to have one committee meeting in September, it would be a little bit premature, because, for example, one of the things that we might want to be looking at is how the new Sunspot Centre dovetails with the Enterprise Centre around the corner. Whether or not, for example, we're able to fill the units and at what cost, whether or not the units are economically sustainable for that area and whether people want to go there. And if we're looking to actually install a manager on the site, what impact that actually has on the whole establishment. Now, I accept that it may be that there may be, it might be an idea just to have one meeting where we can forget about it. But I do think that when we're looking at the regeneration of JRIC, that the committee really needs to keep an idea of what's actually going on here in regard to costings, how effective it is, terms of leasing, etc. Because I understand that there was talk of trying to put some form of lifestyle stroke gym in that there was funding for, but because of the lease we weren't able to do it, which did seem a little bit silly considering we had a CAF and a market, and that would have increased footfall if we could get it there. So there are other issues realistically that I think we need to look at in regard to this site, especially in regard to regeneration of that particular area, which I don't think that one meeting in September, when the site's just opened, will adequately cover all of the, shall we say, issues which may or may not arise. Bearing in mind, if we actually get this particular project right, it's something that we could, shall we say, promote in other areas of deprivation, which could also kickstart other areas of local economy. So while I understand that, it might be, a good idea to tick it off and in effect hide it under the sand on the beach, I do think that there needs to be a little bit more control over this. And in real terms, I think the committee does need to look at it more than just once, because I think there could be other issues at play. And if we're looking to make this a success, then it really does need ongoing monitoring, especially after the actual establishment is built. The businesses are starting to go into the area and the management team may or may not be in place.
Jim, I don't know whether Councillor Griffiths can help. I mean, would you suggest that the 5th of March meeting, or are you suggesting that it's more than one?
Just through the chair, that maybe looking at the actual site on September might be an idea, with another review on the 5th of March, so that you actually can focus maybe on the September meeting as to why our costings were so wildly awry. And then when we look at the March meeting, we can look at whether or not the actual centre itself is meeting expectations, whether or not it's a success story, or whether or not we need to be talking to the regeneration portfolio holder to see if there's any additional help that can be given. Because I do think on this, it's so important to the area and the people down there that we owe it to the local community to monitor it, to make sure that, you know, what we're doing, we're creating a first-rate project there that the tendering council can look at and be proud of.
On your 12th of September, subject to the rest of the committee, you know, endorsing that, and that we record that there's a potential of a further review on the 5th of March at the committee, and that would look at the wider things that you were talking about, the regeneration, the contribution towards regeneration, because there is already details of, you know, as far as information that the committee would be expecting to look at, which is looking at the lettings of the business uses, shops and cafes, and the uses of covered market and event hall. So it may be that on the 12th of September you say actually that is too early, and therefore you might want to bring it back to the 5th of March. But I would suggest that's probably for the committee to make a determination as to whether it then wants to bring that back on the 5th of March. But if we leave it open on the scoping for that to happen.
My suggestion, Mr. Chairman, on the September meeting, we primarily look at the procurement issues of it in regard to the construction costs of the buildings, and why we seem to be looking at the initial costings not reflecting the actual cost at the end. And then on the later meeting, look at our lettings to see how well, once the structure's built, it's being used and how successful it's being. So I actually see this in effect two parts. One could focus on the initial build of the project, and the second meeting can focus on the application and what the actual units are being used for once it's constructed. Because when we went on the site visits, the crews were still in there building it, so it would be very difficult on the September meeting to get an accurate assessment of what's actually going on from a letting point of view, given the, shall we say, how early that would be in the project. I'm not even sure whether it's going to be completed by that time. As when we went there, they were still putting the road in.
I know during the construction process while I was portfolio holder, the dramatic rise in building materials, and if I recall correctly at the time, was primarily steel, shot up. And I had to go back to Essex County Council, held a meeting with Kevin Bentley and one or two members of his cabinet to secure additional funding to actually get to where we are today. So it has been an expensive project, there's no doubt about that, and I think it's things that are beyond our control, and I suppose saying in a polite way, beyond the control of our country, that has resulted in the rocketing costs that we had to build this. Obviously, I'm not privy to recent information, so as you say, I think maybe we could have a brief report in September. I'm mindful that what we don't want to do is juggle too many balls and drop the lot. I'd rather we deliver on some good projects, but I am mindful of this project in the back of my mind. So I wonder if you'd be happy with a brief report in September and then maybe something more substantial in March. Are we happy with that, members? Councillor Steady.
I just think we should be a bit brazen about it. Say, let's go for it. You know, let's do as you say. We're going to get the briefing in September, but then we look to see what the alternatives are going into the new year. I think that's the key to it. You know, we don't want to keep talking about it. If we think it's a good idea, then we should on, shouldn't we, as the scrutiny committee. That's my view.
There's been lots of comments in the past that I've heard saying, well, why wasn't the work done in the past? To which I've said, well, if it had been easy, it would have done. It's not an easy project. If we're hoping for Jaywick to reach its full potential, which is our ambition, We do need to keep going. We do need to monitor because the costs do rise. And as I said, it's certainly shot up while I was the cabinet member, and we had to go to county for additional funding to help us out. Without the intervention of Kevin Bentley and his cabinet, I wonder if we would have faltered. So we were quite fortunate at that point. But we do now need to keep a close eye. So I think, as we say, Graham, a report in September followed up by something more in depth in March. Makes sense. Was there another item because you put your hand up, Phil? Okay, Mark.
Yeah, no, I just want to go back to the items emerging from the meeting of the Council Cabinet Scrutiny Protocol piece. I totally endorse the idea that Councillor Steady's committee takes on the parking partnerships. But I do think the review of the Council's open space management maintenance arrangements is an issue that we perhaps want to look at. I know two of the comments made here was the arrangements for securing seasonal staff to undertake work at the required time. I've certainly had quite a lot of feedback in the last sort of week, including a meeting last night, where it was brought up that the council doesn't seem to be very rapid in bringing in more seasonal staff when we can quite clearly see that the grass is growing rapidly. So there seems to be an issue over the speed that we can employ seasonal staff. So I think that's something we need to look at. And something else I've found, back after 4 years, is how difficult sometimes it is to find out which council is responsible for which piece of land, which piece needs maintaining, etc. That comes up in details of all open spaces. I think if that could be worked up, so there was some kind of interactive map that any councillor, any officer could go to and say, that is definitely ours, or that's a county issue. And I think it's important enough because we're not going to do anything for this current grass cutting season and holiday season, but it would be nice to make sure that we were ready to go next season. So I think that would be something that we need to be doing certainly by January, February, because it would need to happen for the coming season. So I would actually like us to be looking at the open space management, because I think it is time. We're looking about the reputation of the council. It's about producing excellent services, and I'm sure other people have been having lots of feedback over, grass cutting, etc., and who owns this space. I've certainly in Kirby got one piece where county and district argue over it every single year. So it would be nice to be able to establish who does actually own some of these, and I think perhaps an interactive map might be the way forward.
I think what's also interesting on that subject is obviously not only who's doing the work, but who the work is being done on behalf of. Because I've recently had an issue where, and I won't go into detail because it is primarily a ward issue, but where I approached tendering and asked why a certain work was being done, and they said that basically they didn't know because they weren't aware of it. So I took it to Essex County Council, who were quite helpful in explaining why the work was being done, and finished by saying it was being done on behalf of Tendring District Council. So I think there is a little bit of something there that we may need to look at. That was a perfect example. I'm sure it was just a case of the wrong officer responding on the first occasion, because obviously they don't do the work without instruction. But it does, I think it's something that it opened a door that we may need to look at. So I think you're right, with open spaces, we need to look who's doing what and on whose behalf.
So, Chairman, do you want to go through, do you want to start that piece of work now and effectively use the current summer season? Obviously, there's lots of grass growth in the summer, and use that experience to influence the scrutiny, or is it more of a sort of overview look in preparation for 2024 summer season? That would be
I think we're too close to do it now. We'd be trying to influence something at best while it's happening and worst after it's been done.
Yeah.
So it would make sense to look at it towards the end as maybe a review of the I don't know what other members think, but I think trying to influence while it's actually happening could be difficult to say the least. Yes, Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think you can use this as the reason for the review, because I mean, during the middle of this, obviously it's too late now to alter anything, but looking at the sort of horrendous experiences lots of residents have had with their grass growing knee high, I think most councillors have probably had a barrage of complaints, and it really does need to be looked at for next year. So we could use this as the basis of the report to make sure it doesn't happen again. Because from a reputational point of view, this is incredibly damaging to the council, both from residents being incredibly unhappy and from visitors looking at this and thinking this is really, not ideal. I mean, if you imagine you come to Clacton for the first time and you get out and you're looking at 3-foot high grass, you might be thinking, I'm not going to bother coming back here again. So I do think from all points, it really does need to be looking at. And from a reputation of the council, we really haven't done ourselves any favours probably over the summer season this time round.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any comments? Okay. We happy with that approach?
So what's the time?
Yeah,
Chairman, I was going to suggest perhaps that you look at establishing a task and finish group at your September meeting, so that you're in readiness for that. It may be that you say at that stage, no, we'll leave that to the December meeting to set it up, but it will then give you the opportunity of starting work on that during the year. So if we put it on for September.
I'm happy with that. Yep. Chris?
Interest. Can we ask if we were looking to set up a task and finish on grass cutting? Because obviously if you're looking to employ additional temporary labour, that there is a cost implication on that. When would the relevant cabinet member need to have any figures to put that into the budget to allow that to happen for the next season? Have we got any idea?
To put something into the budget. Yeah. So I mean, the
budget would have to be before the annual budget.
Yeah.
Looked at setting that up for, say, September, providing the committee sort of come back with its recommendations in November. That should give the finance people a chance to make any adjustments if it was deemed necessary.
It should, obviously, and if we're flagging up that it's being looked at and the intention is to produce recommendations, that might itself ensure that a window of opportunity to make any adjustments is maintained for as long as possible.
I think one of the things to remember, Chris, is, and I know we spoke about it at the informal meeting, is rather than spend 2 days scrutinising the entire budget, some of which I'm sure will be found to be completely sound. It may be that we spend more time looking at more closely at some areas of the budget, and that may well be an area of the budget that's worth looking at that point.
So, Chairman, there's where that's the outcome of the informal meeting, and you've had reported to you in respect of the and you've considered what came out of the leader and deputy leaders meeting with yourself, and I think what I'm getting certainly on open space and an offer agenda briefing in relation to waste. I didn't think there was any issues with that. In fact, I think there was support for that, and that you're proposing to leave the NEPP to community leadership, subject to community leadership approving that wants to undertake that review.
Just before we sort of draw to a close on this and ask for approval, I would like to say to Graham at the moment. I know his committee, it looks like we've dropped it in his lap. I don't know if you know, if you do need help or assistance from us or would like any of our members to attend, please say. And as I say, if it's one or two of us or whatever, I'm sure we'll have people who'd be happy to come along and give input from the other side. But the NEP is a strange beast at the best of times. So that's speaking with my county hat on, let alone my district. So, but yeah, we're here to assist, Graham. So please don't be afraid to ask. Okay. Obviously, we've been through Appendix D. Are we happy to endorse that as it stands? And then I think the next stage it goes to full council.
It would, Chairman. So this is the opportunity to determine, as I say, certainly initially, the work programme of the committee. What we've gone through is what certainly officers know about, and so we've been able to draft this, present it to you.
Are we happy with that? Do we need a formal vote?
I think we can take assent if there's nodding of heads. All I would say is if the enforcement one is to get off the ground pretty soon, we obviously need to await for the decision of full council on the 11th of July. But if committee is minded to, and on the basis that that is adopted by full council on the 11th of July, whether you would authorise us to establish a task and finish group, proportionate the broad political makeup of the council, and in consultation with yourselves initially, and then more widely with group leaders, should others want to join that task and finish group. So if you're happy broadly with that as an approach, then we could incorporate that as a delegation.
I think that makes sense. We've got quite a big workload, I think. I know Keith is doing his best to make sure we get through it all, but there is quite a bit there to do, and we don't know what we'll find or uncover, so which could take extra time. So yeah, I'm happy with that approach if everyone else is, and asked for work to start as soon as possible. So that's the end of item 5. So we move to the next item. Now that my papers are all in the wrong order, which is item 6, which is the overview and scrutiny annual report 2023. I note that neither chairman of those committees are on this committee anymore. So I'm not going to be able to respond that well, but I know I am on the next page, am I? Oh, yes, I am. Yeah. So I don't know if there's any thoughts, comments on this, or.
Yes, Chair. I mean, as you say, a slightly difficult position to be in. An annual report's required by full council, and it's the joint report is presented to you representing the scrutiny function. And we've used the opportunity of just highlighting 3 of the particular inquiries that were undertaken last year, 2 from this committee and 1 from community leadership, just to give a flavour of the work of scrutiny within the council. If you're broadly, as long as there's not anything of particular offence in there, then it would certainly assist us if you were to endorse it.
Are we happy to endorse the report? I see no shaking of heads, so we're happy to endorse it.
Thank you, Chairman. That's the end of item.
That's the end of the meeting. So I'd like to thank you very much for coming along, and I hope you've enjoyed your first scrutiny meeting of the council. Thank you.